Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I also think there's a key difference here where maybe when I'm talking about okay, I worked on my portfolio for the 6 months. Maybe a lot of people think that I was just there grinding every day for like 10 hours, right? It wasn't like that. Actually, I actually don't like that approach of like that perma grind mentality 24/7, which again it can be very easily misleading. But what I did instead was I did something every day, but not very much. So I would just sit down every day, consistent for maybe 2 to 3 hours, and then just really focus, try to get the most out of it in those 2 to 3 hours, and then just whatever. After that, after I'm done with that, then I do whatever I want. So most of the time, I would just go back to play League or just hang out with friends, grab some food, and then nowadays I do think that taking a break is equally as important or even more important than creating work. And then doing something outside of art is like if you really invest into it, you come back to your art and it's usually a lot better rather than really burning out on your own art all the time.
Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome back to another year of the Learnsquared podcast. I'm delighted to kick the year off with our first guest, Sheng Lam. Sheng is a freelance concept artist who has worked for the likes of Cloud Imperium Games, Probably Monsters, and many more. And personally speaking, is one of my favourite creatives, thanks in part to his witty and compelling designs that are complemented by an excellent style. In this episode, you'll get an insightful glimpse into Sheng's creative process, philosophies, and also some cool info on salt, milk, coffee, thoughts on our industry, and sleep. You don't want to sleep on this one. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Learnsquared podcast, and for the first one of 2022. And I'm super delighted to welcome our next guest, Sheng Lam. Hey Sheng.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me. Super happy to have you on. I'll just get all like the usual corny stuff out the way. I'm just a huge fan of your work. Ever since I first discovered it a few years ago. Yeah, just to keep things simple. Your work's awesome. So I think it's like really cool to get a chance to speak to you from my perspective as that kind of art that I like, and also just to pick apart, I guess, in a positive way, your career and the journey you've had so far, because I'm sure, like many of our listeners and even people new coming on who may be not familiar with yourself, will be equally blown away by your work as I am. But for anybody who is just new to the podcast and obviously your work and just yourself in general, it'd be great if you could just give us a quick intro and origin story as to who you are.
I mean, in the simplest terms, is like okay, I'm Sheng. Hello, I do concept art. I'm from Austria, which a lot of people don't expect because I look very Austrian, obviously. Um, but yeah, I do concept art. I specialize very specifically on hard surface sci-fi. I don't do other different things, and yeah, been just freelancing away for I think 1.5 years now, almost 2 years. And before that, I was in a studio, and yeah, that's about it.
Cool. When did you kind of realize? Obviously, you mentioned yourself like a concept artist, and even myself, and I think many people when they were getting in, it's like a title that we look at because there's a lot of things under that label, like just cool art stuff you see in films. That department is the concept art department that tends to make the visuals for films and games and whatever. But as
Yes.
this, when you end up in this space, you realize that there's many different like segments. When did you first realize that that is the kind of area you wanted to get into?
You mean specifically hard surface or just the term concept
Oh no, yeah,
art?
just this concept art. Like, when did
Okay.
that, I guess, get your attention and be like, hey,
Yeah.
this is the space I want to earn a living
Okay.
in, or just even dive into?
Yeah. So I think the earliest connection to it that I had, I was actually still back in high school, and then we had like a 1 week trip to the UK, actually in the south coast, like around Portsmouth.
Mm.
And just by chance, we were just walking around. I think it was Chester, like a town, and they had these. I think it's called the W.H. Smith,
Yes, yes,
where they
yes.
have like the all the magazines.
Mm.
And just by chance, I just went in there, and then I saw an Imagine FX issue. Um, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, what is this? It's like, oh, drawing, and sounds cool. So I bought it, and then it just so happened that it was the issue where um, Noah Bradley had like his art of freelancing something disc whatever,
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, he had his website really big there, noahbradley.com. I was like, okay, who's this guy? I'm just gonna check it out, and then um, I know he's a bit controversial, but that was kind of the start of my
Mhm.
career, my exposure, and I saw his work, and I was like, wait, this guy actually paints and gets paid. You know, he paints for like Magic the Gathering and
Mm.
all that. I was like, ah, this sounds cool. What is this? You get paid to be creative. And then back at that time, I was still playing a lot of League of Legends.
Right.
So after looking at and doing more research, I was like, okay, I wanna be a League of Legends splash artist. I think that
Mm.
is concept art, which is not now after more
Yeah.
experience, that is not concept art. But yeah, that was the first exposure, and later on, yeah, basically, I did some research. There wasn't anything around Austrian universities that would interest me, and back then, like schools specifically for concept art weren't really established in Europe anywhere.
Mhm.
So that was the time before Focal Point came in, Focal Point School in Poland.
Mm.
So I actually went to FZD, Singapore, studied there, and then I did drop out after 3 months
Mhm.
because of a wrist injury.
Mm.
And after that, pretty much being, I guess, feeling like a failure, almost like I didn't do anything. And because of the injury, because it hurt to even hold a pen. So I didn't do much for the next 6 months. I was kind of just drifting around, not really knowing what I want to do. And then Brainstorm School actually in LA, they opened like pretty around that time. And
Mhm.
then I told myself and my parents is like, okay, I wanna give it one more try. If I don't, if it doesn't happen, then I'll just switch careers or do something else.
Mm.
So I went to Brainstorm, did that for I think 1.5 years
Mhm.
around there, and then came back, worked on a portfolio for around 6 months, then went to that was 2017,
Mhm.
and then that was like there was like an industry workshops in London around September that year, and it just so happened that there were a lot of companies with booths, so I
Mhm.
flew there with a portfolio, showed my portfolio around networking, like all of that stuff, the pre-pandemic fun, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then made an artist and got a job at Cloud Imperium Games.
Sick. And I guess before, like you mentioned, you were a bit like, just to like, I guess summarize, like you're a bit like lost, I guess, trying to figure out what to do since like FCD, up until I guess the industry workshops event. Um, like, what was the feeling of being lost? Was it just a case of that? Like, was it the injury that really brought that on, or was there anything else that was kind of triggering that?
I think it was mainly the injury because you don't really realize how important, like you kind of take your eyes and hands for granted, and then if you kind of lose that ability, then oh, you you can do it, but not in a way.
Mm.
So that was the main reason, and then the other reason is maybe because like I felt like a failure because my parents put a lot of money into FCD and then I
Hmm.
didn't complete it. I dropped out, and then I did feel like a failure, and then it was
Mm.
kind of like I guess being depressed to a certain degree and
Right.
not knowing what to do. But at the end, I didn't see myself doing like really anything else, and then I wanted to really try it again, give it a second chance. Yeah,
And just to like on the topic of like say depression and like the concept of failure. I say the concept of failure because it's not, I guess, a concept. Like when you feel like a failure, that's just like it's pretty straightforward. That's
yeah,
something that like I've been through many times. But there was like say a period when it was like just like that's how I defined myself and my work. And then obviously like thing you mentioned about depression as well, and like experiencing things like that. And then again you mentioned about injuries and pain. That's something that like I can 100% relate to, and that's something that I have issues with currently. Like I'm just getting investigated, so it's still like not determined what it is, but to the point where like working and trying to do stuff whilst in, you could say, excruciating pain. Like there's like it's I guess I wouldn't say it's exactly the same as not being able to do anything like you could do. But I totally get what you're saying. Like when it's like how it can affect your mindset, trying to complete tasks when you're in pain and not being able to do things how you want to do them. Um, but like at the same time, with all of those things, like pain obviously is a different thing. It can either heal, you can get it sorted out, or it's something you live with. But the other things you mentioned about like failure and depression, those are things that you can work towards and you can get yourself out of either through just like your own sheer will or through getting again help as well. Like how did you overcome that, and what was that moment like when you no longer felt that way? And again, to add another question to these thousand questions I'm asking, um, has that ever come back and you've got yourself out again, or was that again that only that point in time where you really felt like that?
I think that was the only point in time that I felt like that. That was really the, well, I guess the lowest point
Mm-hmm.
in my career that I would feel. But in terms of overcoming, it was, well, I mean, it sounds kind of funny, but pretty much for the next 6 months after dropping out, because I was just so aimless. Um, I just binge watch anime for 6 months, like every day, 12 hours, and just like, and then at some point I was like, yeah, this is not gonna get me anywhere.
Yeah.
Time is kind of running out, and then I started to do more research on like, okay, is there any other like possibilities to pursue concept art in another school?
Mm.
And then, well, back then it was okay. Either you go to art center and enter a massive debt, like you go into massive student loans,
Mhm.
being how expensive it is. That wasn't really an option that I wanted to do.
Mm.
And yeah, I guess it was kind of just lucky with timing that brainstorm just opened up. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, let's just try it out. And obviously, I did have financial help from my parents,
Mhm.
so they helped me out a lot, and they always just supported me. And
Mm.
yeah, after coming there, it was also a very different experience than FCD, which yeah, it was like a much better experience, I would say. And that also contributed not only with like the friends that I made there, the company that I had, that also contributed to a lot to just getting out of that mindset.
Mm. So
Yeah.
I guess it's like I guess it's quite straightforward when you think about it, and it is common sense. But it you could have easily gone, and I'm sure many people have experienced this as well, where like you said, like watching the anime and all that kind of stuff, like you're actually not doing the thing that you wanted to do. But that was the thing that was kind of, I guess, taking you into that space. But then when you got into that environment, like you did at Brainstorm and started creating art and obviously building everything you needed to do, that really helped, I guess, kind of like get you out of that. And it's quite important to, I guess, acknowledge for people who are experiencing this and eventually will experience this because it's not a given that if things are going right, it's always going to go right. There can always be that dip, right?
Yeah.
Um, so like there's you can I guess work your way out of this, not in a way that's painful as such, but I guess another thing as well. And I'd love to hear your opinion on this. Like for me, something that I really struggled with, and something that I felt was like I guess the monkey on my back was not having a quote unquote portfolio, something that I could say represented my work, at least to the point where not only could get hired, but I just felt like like felt proud to show that. Obviously, you mentioned that you created one, would you say like 6 months or so, where you really worked hard on your portfolio. Um, did that have a big impact on your mindset and how you felt about your art as well? Like getting that body of work down and having it represent you as yourself?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I also think there's a key difference here where maybe when I'm talking about okay, I worked on my portfolio for the 6 months. Maybe a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people think that I was just there grinding every day for like
Mm,
10 hours, right? It wasn't like that.
right.
Actually, I actually don't like that approach of like that perma grind mentality, twenty four
Mm,
seven, which again it can be very easily misleading. But what I did instead was I did something every day, but not very much. So I would just sit down every day, consistent for maybe 2 to 3 hours, and then just really focus, try to get the most out of it in those 2 to 3 hours,
sick.
and then just whatever after that. After I'm done with that, then I do whatever I want. So most of the time, I would just go back to play League or just hang out with friends, grab some food, and then later on, as I was looking back to it, I think I've carried that type of like balance, work-life balance mentality to this day is I used to think, and I think partly because of the again the FCD like grinding mentality, because it's very like military boot campy.
Right.
Um, Nowadays I do think that taking a break is equally as important or even more important than creating work, and then doing something outside of art. It's like if you really invest into it, you come back to your art, and it's usually a lot better
Hmm.
rather than really burning out on your own art all the time.
That's well put. And yeah, I think it's very important that you mentioned that as well. Like how you specified how you work towards that portfolio and how again you spent your time. Because like it's I guess a quite a cliche thing to say, that just work hard, right? But
Yeah,
then people can interpret that in many different ways. Working 12 hours straight, like you mentioned, or doing it for a few hours and switching off. Personally, like that is something that I'm getting more and more drawn towards is just trying to find out a way to either work less or not do art, but in a part like, exactly the way you just mentioned it.
yeah,
And that's awesome to hear. And I think it's also important for many people to, I guess, really grasp if you're not in that kind of space that, like, I guess, so just to jump in there, did you ever feel during working like that, like, it ever felt wrong? Like, did you ever think that I should maybe do a little bit more, or did that always feel right to you?
oh, I mean, of course, like there's this whole everyone suffers through the guilt feeling. Like when you're relaxing, is like, oh shit, no, I should actually be doing
Yeah.
something. And then in the beginning, I was like that as well. There's always this little voice in your head. It's like, how dare you enjoy yourself for a few hours a day?
Yeah.
You should be working and grinding. But over time, you like get used to it,
Mhm.
and then you start feeling less guilt. I know this is just specifically my case.
Mhm.
I know a lot of friends and people I've talked to is they still feel that type of guilt, and it's something really hard to get rid of
Mhm.
completely. Um, but yeah, what was the question again? Did I answer that?
No, no, you did.
Okay.
But like, just to again touch upon that, how does that kind of does that happen also when it comes to client work and working like you did in the studios and stuff? Like, do you still operate the same way, or do things change versus your personal approach for your personal work?
So in a studio, the it was a bit different because well, you are bound by the company, so you come in and then you have to work
Mm-hmm.
throughout the day. And I personally think nobody works 8 hours a day straight all the time. In a
Nope.
studio environment, is usually okay. You work a few hours, then you talk shit for 2 hours. Well, not 2 hours, but you know the social interaction is there as
Yes.
well, which I think also plays a very big part in the studio environment. For example, like you see what your neighbor is doing or what your team is doing, you get
Mm-hmm.
inspired by them. That kind of stuff you don't really get as a freelancer. But I think in a studio, the one thing I didn't like was, for example, if you're let's say you do no, okay, let me rephrase it. From my experience, you didn't get rewarded by efficiency
Mm-hmm.
because if you were done and you did like good work and you were done 2 hours earlier, you're kind of supposed to like stay there still because of
Yes.
company rules. And that kind of I think that over time was kind of just grinding on me because I was like, okay, these 2 hours that I'm not really working and I'm pretending that I'm working, I could have just played games, read manga, do something else for myself. And I do think if you have the opportunity and like you should always just take care of yourself,
Mm-hmm.
whether you want to reasonably. Obviously, you shouldn't just go play games all day and not do anything,
Mm.
but you should have that balance. So if you invest in yourself, your art is also going to be better.
Now that's yeah again well put also because I think it's like um I guess it's something that you also learn with time, or at least like something that I've had to kind of realize that you don't need to have that kind of, I guess, work approach. So before I became like full time artist myself, I didn't work in a studio or anything, at least art related. I worked just work, like regular job or whatever.
Yeah,
And is exactly that mentality you said. Like every second you're there is supposed to be done doing kind of work.
yeah,
Like having breaks or like you just mentioned, just like socializing, all that. That's actually, if you think about it, is healthy stuff for a team environment, for a company environment. Like maybe we're still in a bit in the dark ages of like how work can be done, or maybe there's like that nuance isn't there to kind of like realize that that actually can really benefit your just the work life in general. I think, have you seen that what is it, the Red Bulls, not Red Bull, Chicago Bulls documentary, the Michael Jordan one on Netflix, The Last Dance, I think.
No.
I'm not into basketball at all, but I'd recommend giving it a watch. But something that you just mentioned reminded me of something in there. Are you familiar with Dennis Rodman, the basketballer?
Mhm.
Quite iconic. Like, he had piercings and like different colored hair and stuff. But anyway, he was like part of that team, the Michael Jordan team, the super successful one. But he was someone who was like, he needed to like just get out of the environment, wanted to go clubbing, go partying, all that kind of stuff. And I might be getting this completely wrong, but his coaches and whoever else is like involved just like let him do it because they knew that's what he needed in order to perform at his best.
Yeah.
So again, it's not like everybody has to be like that, but for some, it's super important.
Yeah.
And then when you, I guess, switch to freelance, is that something? I guess you carried it through because that's the way you work. But did that actually become a negative, or has that actually been the perfect way for you to operate as a freelancer? Also,
Oh, I think it's perfect. Like, I think after experiencing the freelance lifestyle, if you want to call it that way, with
yeah.
the flexibility of putting your own hours and then deciding when you work,
Mm-hmm.
I think that has helped a lot. Right now, the current schedule that I have is, well, I sleep a lot because I do
Mm-hmm.
think sleep and rest is arguably the most important part.
Definitely, yes.
If you don't rest, then you can't really do good work. And I'm very against the whole, oh, I'm working 24/7, sleeping 3 hours a day or something.
Yeah.
I'm really against it. So one is sleep, and then I have a schedule where, okay, I start at 9 or 10, and then I get everything done before 5 or 6, and then no matter what happens, like I really try to get it done.
Mm-hmm.
And then what that has led is that I've become very efficient of what I do, and I know
Nice.
I have an exact idea of like how long something is gonna take me. And then once I've hit that 6 hour mark, or well, 6 p.m. mark or 5 p.m. mark, then I can do whatever I want guilt free because I knew I've done my work, I've done my day like successfully.
Mm.
Now I can just play video, which I mean, I think that pretty much happens every day. It's like
Yeah.
after 6, after dinner, I just play games throughout the night. And for me, that's kind of what works for myself as like a hobby and nurturing the other side, the non art side, because I'm really, yeah, I just really like playing games, for example.
Sick. And regarding like say sleep, like again, you're absolutely right. Like sleep is just, it's a secret weapon if you can figure it out. Like if you're having struggle sleeping, or even using that as currency to kind of get your work done, like sacrificing it. How much sleep do you give yourself, or is it again something that you just feel like, I'm tired, I'm going sleep, or are you quite regimented with when you go sleep and when you get up, and even just more how long you get sleep?
So sleep, I do think anything under 8 hours is a no.
Mm-hmm.
I do get a rough amount of like 9 to 10 hours of sleep
Nice.
every day, because I found again, based on previous experiences, like for example the FCD experience, a lot of the things that you hear is actually true, like how hardcore it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then from my experience, it was, well, because I came in pretty fresh without any experience in drawing.
Mm-hmm.
I did sleep for the 3 months that I was in there. I did sleep 3 to 4 hours a day, and
Wow.
the rest was just grinding. And that kind of just wrecks your body. And so that was one experience. And then I've also noticed later on, especially with freelance or during the company as well, is the more you sleep and the more well rested you are, then obviously the more efficient, and your
Mm-hmm.
decision making is gonna be like super fast, super accurate, and you just work more efficient and better.
And just to geek out more on the sleep side of things, how do you like, I guess, do you coach your body before you go to bed? And what I mean by coaching is like, do you make sure you're not watching like say TV before you go to bed, or in front of a screen, or is it a case of, like, you know, it is recommended from what I've studied on sleep and what people have said is like, ideally you have like, I think say an hour or half an hour where you don't have any, I guess, artificial light. You just natural lighting, make sure your blinds or curtains are closed and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you go in that depth, or not so much?
Um. So I'm completely addicted to the internet and the PC. So I can't really turn off like just 1.5 hours before bed. I don't
Yeah,
really do
yeah,
that. But what I do is I do have the like this FLux program where it dims down the blue screen
nice,
throughout the night on the screen, so it gets a bit more orange, easier on the eyes. But what I've been doing or always done is I do read before sleeping in bed. So after I turn off the PC, get ready for bed, I do read in bed on the Kindle,
nice.
and then that way, I think usually it's around 1 hour or so of reading, and then through lying and reading, like I do get gradually tired, more
Yes,
tired, and then I turn it off and I fall asleep pretty easily. So
that's dope.
yeah,
That's actually really inspired me because I'm the complete opposite to you. Like my sleep schedule and how it happens, and I can blame my kids for that, but I know there's a lot of me that's in control of what happens. I'm like it's just a nightmare in terms of like how I organize everything.
yeah.
And even the things you said, like I know that's how it's supposed to be done, but I don't do it. But again, ensuring that like you're basically you just confirmed that it's a great example to have those kind of behaviors. And I think it's quite important, just to highlight as well, like what you just mentioned there, is that you already know for yourself how important it is. So you're going to make sure that you gear your day and your, I guess you have your life to make sure that that continually happens. And also you've seen the actual positive results from there. So there's no need for you to kind of even doubt it, like saying there's a better way to do it because you've proven to yourself that it works. Um, and what do you read? Like, what are you reading?
I read. I read. So I read mainly. Well, before we touch upon that, I do want to say like what you said. It is, or what I said before about the sleeping schedule and all that. I think the important thing not to forget is everyone works differently, and then whatever you hear on like other podcasts or other artists that you admire, for example, doesn't necessarily have to work for you.
Hmm.
So you should always listen to like what your body says. Like you are you, and only something will work for you that other people won't work.
Hmm.
So you should listen to yourself. But yeah, in terms of books, I mainly read either nonfiction or sci-fi
Sick.
fiction. Sci-fi I haven't read that much, but in the last year, this year is generally just nonfiction books, but it's really obscure, very specific. So I find authors that dive deep into very specific things. So I've read books. I've read a book about it's a guy who wrote just about salt,
Okay.
um, how important salt, like how underrated it was throughout history, and
Sick.
then he wrote a number of series of books that I've been reading. So he has a book about salt, about cod, how much cod of an influence had in the world and the
Yeah.
history, paper, then generally about insects, milk, for example, like the whole history of milk, why we drink milk, how it came to be. Like if you think about milk, it's very strange, but
Yes.
why do we even drink like animals' milk, and then why
Yeah. Yeah.
specifically like cow's milk or
Yeah.
donkey or all that? And then it's like whales are mammals, but we don't really drink whale milk.
True.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
stuff like that that the author discusses, and I think reading about those things is like just get a general. It's another source of inspiration or just general knowledge, I would say, that can carry over to your work because it sparks interest in different things, different areas that you can take inspiration from.
That's that's cool. That you like. It's all the specific topics. Again, like myself, most of the books that I own tend to find I'm buying, at least not even recently, like just forever, have been like factual stuff, non-fiction stuff, just stuff that has information, cool facts or whatever, as opposed to I guess like stories and stuff. Um, why those specific things without recommendations? That would like, did you think, hey, that's a curious thing, I want to figure that out? And again, how long have you been into that kind of like type of, I guess, literature?
I think just generally, like um, I do browse Wikipedia quite a lot, and then there's just I'm just how do I say I'm very interested in just different random stuff.
Hmm.
So I usually browse Wikipedia, and then from there it's just like a rabbit hole, and you just read, and then you're like, oh, did you know this? It's like, oh no, that, and then you learn about processes, and then so many different kind of things that you take for granted that actually have a history. I think that also ties back to um, I actually did a few years back. I did like a portfolio piece of sci-fi trash bins, uh, and the main thought behind that was like I tried to find whatever like the most one of the most common objects that you
Mhm.
see around, but nobody gives it a second thought. It's like someone actually in the history had to design trash bins, but
Yeah,
where does
yeah.
it come from? Why? That type of stuff, and then you just go down the rabbit hole.
Sick. Rabbit holes are the best, especially I guess for a creative mind as well. Maybe not so much if you're not a creative mind. I don't know, weird things can happen, but I think for at least artists, let's just eliminate it to just artists. It's like again, it's all about ideas, right? Especially for a concept art, it's about producing ideas.
Yeah,
And again, I have a conversation with people who specifically, I don't think it's for any fault of their own. Their inspiration comes from art that's already been completed, like like ArtStation or art books.
yeah,
But I think it's quite obvious to see, or quite easy to see, like how that can actually, it's like processed food, right? It's not exactly healthy for your creative diet because like someone's used that information, made stuff, although it is cool, but the raw ingredients, like the like facts and or whatever else, whatever it might be that inspires you, might not, it's not necessarily have to be like literature, it could be anything. Like that is, I guess, a better resource for that. Would you agree?
yeah. I think reading is definitely very underrated, and it makes sense because okay, if you see an image, something very cool, it's much easier to digest it. Reading, you actually have to, well, I guess, move your eyes and understand
Mm-hmm.
and process the information, whereas an image is very simple.
Mm.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with like looking at art or art station,
Right.
especially if you start out because you find artists that you admire
Of course, yeah.
and then you kind of want to like replicate them, and then once you do it, it's always gonna be like worse than them, and you feel like shit, that kind of stuff. But it's good to learn from how they do certain, you know, forms, certain things, and analyze why you like them. So that's always like the inspiration part. But you should also do what interests you, like from yourself, from within. Being curious about just general things and um, yeah, just try to research pretty much. So
Mm.
I think a combination of both, having really good reference material, like visual material, and then also reading and knowledge, just for example, things how certain things came to be,
Mm.
where things come from, all that stuff can help to some like can help to create something unique. Kind of like
Mm.
what you said, they're all parts of ingredients to make a really good dish. But if you put in too much at the same time, then it's not gonna be good.
Yes. Well,
So you
well
have to
put
be
as well.
picky.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have
Yeah.
to be picky. Yeah.
Um. So this kind of like being into again, like literature and just reading and like more, to summarize, process the information in that particular way. Is that something you've been doing since an early age, or is that something you've adopted later on?
No, I think it's later. I think early age,
Mm.
like a lot of people you hear their background and they're always like, okay, I started drawing at a very young age. I knew exactly what I wanted to
Hmm.
be. I wasn't like that. I think when I was always just playing games, like video games, and it was only very later on after graduating high school where you're like, okay, what do I do now?
Mm.
Like school is over. Now you have to think for yourself, what do you actually want to do? And then I do remember I did like drawing. I did enjoy that, but I didn't know it was you could get paid for it. So I
Right.
thought, okay, you still kind of get to be creative and all of that, and yeah. But um, man, I keep forgetting the questions that you asked.
No, no, it's all good. You answered it. You answered it.
Okay.
So like drawing, is that something again, like it was just, I guess, just fun, just something that you did as a kid? It wasn't a case of like I'm training myself to be this badass artist. It was just I like this. It's fun. Same way like
Uh,
you said about playing games and stuff. Um, what I want to ask also is, like, in school, what were your favorite subjects then? Because I have a hunch that based on what you've just said, it was some of the more like I guess factual lessons as well, like say geography or science and stuff that had all these cool facts and knowledge. Was that also appealing to you uh, growing up, or not so much?
Not really. So that's kind of the thing. In school, I really just didn't care. I thought
Right.
everything was like really boring. But
Mm.
then I think after pursuing this career further, they're like really drill into you. Hey, you need to do your own research, and
Mm.
then later on I became like more intrigued by you start noticing details, certain things, and question a lot of things, what the
Mm.
history is. But that also like a lot of it just came later on in life. Early on, I was just a brat that just liked to play games.
And yeah, growing up, actually, before we touch upon that, um, if you didn't end up doing art or pursuing that space, where do you think you would have ended up, or what also was kind of like on that, I guess, short list of like, I've graduated now, this is what we can do as a job. What was else on that list, if anything?
Yeah, that was the hard part. There wasn't really anything that I
Mm.
would super interested in. I think the closest thing I can think of now is like I do care about coffee a lot. I make my own, I grind it my own, and I do research into that. So, and then I also had a bit of experience being a barista, so attending the machine. So I probably would have done something in the coffee business, but
Nice.
also knowing just how competitive it is, like it sounds really hard.
What you mean,
Um,
like actually just, I guess, selling a type of coffee or anything in that particular space?
I think anything in that particular space sounds interesting because I know, well, reading into coffee as well, like one of the problems is because of climate change, it's going to be a
Yeah.
lot harder to grow coffee plants. So that's going to change. And the challenge now is how can you supply millions and millions of tons of coffee in
Mm.
a changing climate that's not going to be there in a few years or a few hundred years. It's like, okay, can you grow it in? Um, there was a video I saw about coffee being grown in Britain.
Hmm.
Like Britain doesn't have, it's not ideal to grow coffee trees,
Yeah.
coffee bushes, but someone actually managed to do it with, well, very artificially. Let's put it this way. So that could be like a future research product
Mm.
or research thing.
And like, let's geek out on coffee a little bit. Is it mainly grown in? Is it South America? Am I correct in assuming that's mainly where it's
Well,
grown from? Or is it
South
different
America
places?
is very different places.
Hmm.
Like it is mainly like South America. There's, well, coffee originated from Ethiopia in
Okay.
Africa. So
Yeah.
Africa is a big grower, and then a lot, some like Southeast Asia does have a lot of coffee growers as well, like Java.
Mm.
And then something that is very interesting that I thought is in recent times. So where tea comes from China, in the
Mm.
Yunnan region, it was traditional for like thousands of years. It was just a tea region, but only like in the recent years, it has become a coffee region where
Wow.
people start planting coffee. And then I'm like, Chinese coffee, you don't really think of like China for coffee. You usually think
Yeah.
of it as tea. And it's like, okay, that's very interesting. I do want to try that. And then who knows, maybe in the future something will change. Or yeah, there's there's infinite possibilities
Mm.
for everything.
And like you mentioned, obviously there, like about trying to fulfill that need because things like climate change are affecting. I guess it's basically like it's gonna eliminate those places where coffee is originally grown, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Um,
then oh,
yeah,
sorry,
go.
go on.
No, please go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then that also like, if you kind of run out of one's resource, then you start looking into other
Hmm.
resources. Like, is it like a coffee substitute? And then so far there really isn't. I think
Mm.
there's like approximate things, but there isn't really something that can replace 100% the coffee bean for now. And I think maybe in the future, given like for example, now with the whole lab grown meat, fake meat,
Hmm.
it is pretty convincing now than
Mm.
before it was like 20 years ago. And I do think with like time and technology and all that, we do, maybe we are gonna reach a point where it's really really close to the
Yeah.
thing, or even better. Who knows? If it's better, then yeah, it's
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get at because you mentioned obviously like someone figured out how to grow coffee in not in its so-called ideal environment. Obviously, that's through tech. And one of the cool things that I like just ever since is like always been a curiosity for me is like future tech. Like not so much just because it's cool or one of the reasons why I like sci-fi. Again, not because of the aesthetics of it, but because of the problem-solving nature of it. Like, oh, if you imagine this is how humans are going to be so and so in the future, this is like say Star Trek, the replicators where they basically just 3D printed their own food and ate it.
yeah.
Things like that. So that's quite intriguing, and obviously that's just science fiction. It's just that would be cool to see how that would be. But now obviously more like real world things. That's things that are affecting our daily life. Like that's happening now. So based on your research of coffee and stuff right now, like where do you see that headed? Is it going to be just everything's going to be more like lab grown? It's more going to be a case of just a fusion between tech and science propping up nature's processes, or do you think it's like what kind of things are you seeing?
Man, like I'm not an expert. I just
Oh
like
no,
to
just
read.
based on
I'm
your
more like
research,
an
because yeah,
hobbyist.
because you
I
definitely into
mean,
that space, so it'd be cool to
I
see.
say research, but that makes me sound like an expert or like something which I'm not. But
Compared to this
something,
conversation right now, you are the expert.
yeah.
So
I mean,
please go ahead.
well, I do. So one thing that's coming up a lot is the vertical farmings, because a lot
Yes.
of traditional farms are just horizontal. They take a lot of water and resources and all that. And vertical farming is way more efficient. So I can see a future when with like proper or better fleshed out technology, you can grow different types of plants in indoor environments,
Mhm.
because you can just like, I mean, nowadays it already happens, like mushroom farms and all of that. They have very elaborate indoor setups to make the perfect growing conditions,
Mhm.
so that can easily happen. The other thing that could happen though is like the price of coffee just goes up
Mm.
exponentially, because you can't grow as many coffee trees anymore, so it becomes really rare. Or someone finds like a really good alternative which you just don't know about,
Yeah.
because a lot of the food that we eat, you don't really like. You kind of just get it in the supermarket, so you don't really know where it comes from, how it is processed, what type of techniques you use, and but then again, that ties all back to like me just being interested in,
Mm.
especially food, how things. Well, now we're nerding out, but yeah, how things came to be. Like if you think about a lot of Asian cuisines,
Yeah.
and like I find fermentation to be fascinating,
Mm.
because rot like basically fermentation and decay is rotting, but it just, if it benefits humans, then it's called fermentation due to the
Yes. Yes.
bacteria.
Well put.
Yeah, and then if it's, well, decay is just bad, really bad for you. But
Mm.
the process is like someone actually had to eat like the stuff that was rotting or decaying,
Yes.
and they were like, wait, I'm feeling fine, this is good. And then a fermented taste is very particular, you kind of get used to it,
Yeah.
and then it just like evolved from there. Or other things like, I don't know, for the longest time I didn't know that blew my mind. I just didn't know that cinnamon is tree bark.
Actually, when you see in its raw form, of course, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But we also in process form, basically.
yeah. Or like the
Yeah.
tubes. But then you're like,
Yeah. Yeah.
someone actually took so many different trees, like
Mm-hmm.
50 trees or something, and just, I don't know, what did they do? They ground the tree bark and then sniffed it or something, I don't know, but it became a spice. So a lot of like different things are very, like, people don't really know about where it
Mm.
comes from, but I find that very interesting. And then you can use that process to fuel ideas for example,
Yes.
a world
Yes.
that you build. So for example, I don't know, do you know about well, the Chinese century egg, like the black one, the fermented?
I've that does ring a bell. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is very specific, and like it has such a strange taste, but it's very popular in China and
Yeah.
Asia. And if you give that to like a Western person, most likely the reaction is like, no, how could you eat that?
Uh-huh.
But then the more I think about it, it's like, I haven't read anything on much, but it makes a lot of sense that the way it became that was actually had to do a lot with food preservation, because
Yes. Yeah.
back
Yeah.
then you didn't have, same with fermentation, same
Yeah.
with milk. Back then you didn't have any refrigerators, so you had to process it to make it last.
Yeah.
And it makes sense that over time it became like a delicacy or something, which is why. Well, sorry, I'm just totally nerding out, but
No, no, dude. This is I love this stuff.
yeah,
Carry on, please.
yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
the same with like milk. Like in early times, like nobody drank raw milk because it was so dangerous, especially like for example in the Indian regions with the hot climate. If you drink raw milk, then you're gonna die because of the bacteria, which happened a
Mm.
lot.
Yeah.
Which is why like before raw milk was drank, people made it into yogurt, which
Mhm.
preserves a lot better, or into cheeses. It's like, oh, so many things make sense. Like if
Yes.
you
Yes.
learn a little bit more about it, yeah.
Now, like again, even things like salt you mentioned, like obviously at one point in history that was the most valuable commodity because of food preservation.
Yeah.
And food
Yeah.
preservation, obviously, I think it was Roman armies or some armies. Um, like it just basically made them live longer than their competitors, or even like kept, like civilizations alive to do what they need to do to keep it ticking over. So obviously, of course, I guess a bit like what data is in our current era, and a few other things like that's the current, I guess, commodity. And just relating to like things of let's take food. We were just talking about certain processes, or even like like something that I again think about a fair bit as well, and just like it's always that what if or how did this happen, or how did this come to be. Whether that's just my curiosity or it's just that creative brain or whatever. But like okay, so what was the sequence of events that triggered someone to discover that this happened in order to for it to be what it is now? For example,
Yeah, and
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, like I do think a lot of it was just accident
Yeah,
or
for sure.
someone. It's the same with mushrooms. There's so many mushrooms. Someone or a lot of people probably passed away because they tried the wrong mushroom, and
Exactly.
through
Yeah,
that, you're
yeah,
like, oh, this mushroom is actually safe. This is really dangerous. So
yep,
a lot of like trial and error. Sorry, can you hear me?
yeah. No, I can hear. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So a lot of trial and error, and I do think that also applies to like art
Mm,
because there's no perfect way. Um, like if you follow tutorials and then you follow like you learn stuff from that, but whatever you follow might not necessarily work for you, and a lot of it just comes down to you trying out what and finding out what works specifically for what you want to do,
mm-hmm,
and that takes a lot of trial and error.
mm. And again, like weaving that thing in, like information and just like doing these like deep dives and rabbit holes in just like topics and stuff like that as well. And then applying it to art. Obviously, you can do it in a deliberate way when you're researching for a project, like intentionally, and you're looking for specific things. Maybe it's what the client's looking for, so you think, okay, let's look into that a little bit deeper. Or it just happens passively, where it just sits in your brain, and then hey, I remember this, I'm going to use it for that.
Yeah,
Like, so one thing about your work that, well, there's many things I like about your work, but and it's clear obviously, like how you deep dive into just the things that interest you and how you process that information and how you come to conclusions and stuff like that as well. Like, it answers a lot of things that you see on the canvas that you use and stuff you created. Like, take for example world building, like you mentioned, they specialize in the hard surface and that kind of stuff, but there's a huge ton of world building that you can see just in the forms and the way you present it, and even like the type of like subject matter you tackle. Whereas perhaps maybe if someone were to think of world building and kind of things that jump into mind, maybe you could argue that hard surface and props isn't necessarily the first thing that jumps into mind. It's always like maybe environment design or character
yeah,
design. So like regarding your work, and obviously you mentioned that you specialize in hard surface. How did you reach that like point? Like, when did it? Where was it something you were drawn to, or is it something that you kind of found yourself trying different things and you ended up in the hard surface space?
yeah. Yeah, that's pretty funny. So I told you like before, I wanted to be specifically like a League of Legends splash artist.
Yeah.
So in order to do that, you need to not only be amazing at painting and rendering, you need to know anatomy, and you need to know like materials. Right? So doing brainstorming and all that, I did try, the classic figure drawing and all of that. And after, I think I tried like once or twice, and then I was so discouraged by the results where I was like, you know what, I fuck this. I'm not gonna do this. And then that gradually just made me gravitate more towards hard surface because to me, perspective made a lot more sense. Like it's very logical where you put your vanishing points, how you just follow like the perspective lens and build forms, all of that. Whereas I found characters and gesture drawing be very, very difficult. And then I thought more about it. It's like, okay, everyone wants to do characters, everyone wants to do environments, but nobody or very, very few people want to actually do props, hard surface
Mm,
vehicles. So if I can just double down on that and become like really good at it, like that's first less competition. And then secondly, you also like stand out a lot more. And then you're more specialized. So that means your value is also higher
mm,
because there's so many. It's also very evident. For example, if you go to our station challenges, you see characters and environments are always like so many people,
yes.
and then you see the props and it's just like under 100.
Yep.
So it's like a very very small ecosystem type of thing. But then if you do it really well, and I thought to myself, okay, I can't really render much. I can't do anatomy. To this day, I still can't do it.
Mm.
Then that means that I have to get really, really good at the other things. And that was kind of like the moment where I chose, okay, I'm really doubling down on this and better make it work. So
Now that's a good origin story for the hard surface stuff, and it's
yeah,
also good to highlight as well that like it's a lot of us obviously do work on passion. A lot of the time, it's like, hey, this is what I like to do. This is what I've enjoyed. I want to continue to do that. But it's also, in my opinion, important to go on that, like, I guess, thought process of developing yourself as an artist, and even take on board a bit of strategy, which you just displayed there. It's a case of like, like this is a space that isn't very well, it's not as popular as the other ones. But arguably, maybe some of the coolest stuff that you think about when it comes to certain IPs is tends to be like the props and maybe even the vehicles in some cases. Like,
Yeah.
or they could be the most iconic thing that define a character or an environment, for example. So but at the same time, for somebody who maybe is starting out or maybe is looking to switch and they think, okay, let's be more strategic. Um, do you think that maybe there still needs to be a certain kind of passion in that space? Like, for example, was that something that you always were kind of drawn to diving into that space? Or do you think that maybe as long as you apply yourself and get a good, I guess, like, a process of just developing yourself and learning and all that kind of stuff, like, can you technically switch into anything?
I think it just really depends on what you want to do. Like
Mm,
that also falls under the category of discussion like generalist and specialist.
mm-hmm,
And then that really just depends on yourself, because if you like to do everything, then go for it.
mm,
Like at the end of the day, you should do what you enjoy, because then I do think you will excel at that. And then eventually, like, you get known for what you like to do, which is the ideal position that you want to be, because you get hired for being you,
mm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%, 100%.
And
Yeah, please.
yeah, like the again, the only thing that thought process was that, okay, there's already so many amazing environment artists and character artists, and yet so very compared to that, like hard surface and props, there's not that many.
Mm,
And then it was like, okay, this is definitely something that I think I should take advantage of. And over time, obviously, the more you do it, like the more you enjoy it as well. I think the more you appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, again, you should pretty much do what you're interested in.
mm-hmm.
Always, like, you should always just listen to yourself.
And did you ever, so to show up on that again, this is more just speaking on behalf of people that I've spoken to and just like general kind of like, I guess, commentary you see where it's a case of maybe someone just really wants to, like, the most important thing is to get a career, get into the industry.
Yeah.
So they're happy to do anything, but then maybe not so much, you could say, like a generalist.
Mhm.
And obviously they will just kind of like try many different things and maybe ignore that voice which says just do what interests you. Or maybe it's a case of they get to that conclusion where it's okay, that does interest me, but I don't think I want to get work in that space. I want to go into that
Yeah.
space because it's hot or whatever. Like, what would you say to somebody who is going through that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just like you said, I mean, maybe the way I'm phrasing it is very black and white, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is really gray. It depends on so many different factors. I do personally think that if you want to get a job in the industry, make props, because every company wants props. Like, you need props for every project. Like, there's no doubt about it. And then I think if you have props with something else, whether that's characters or environments, usually it's props and environments.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get those two generally, then it's a good way to get into the industry. Because again, props totally underrated, but so essential and so important to every
Mm-hmm.
project. And if you do them well, like, oh my god, like, endless work for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everyone needs props. So, but yeah, at the same time, I do think sometimes it's not as straightforward to really know what you're interested in. So you should definitely just try different things out, learn different people, like learn different techniques from people, or just try things out. And then that falls again into the trying and failing and
Mm-hmm.
that type of stuff. And then slowly, by doing more, by trying out more, you can filter to something that slowly crystallizes to what you like to do.
And the kind of work that you make now, obviously, like, your voice is clear. At least in my opinion, I'm sure if everybody else too. Like, when you post stuff up, even if I don't see the name, I know that's your work. And it's like, okay, cool. Cheng did that. Let's see what he's up to. That's it. That's normally the process when I see you post up stuff. Um, is this something that you're happy? This realm you want, like, this, I guess, your pocket of creativity, is that happy? Are you happy to stay in that space, or are you thinking of maybe branching out and thinking, okay, let's try this now, let's try that now? Like, because again, with creatives, like, there's always that endless curiosity, and you can always
Yeah.
find yourself doing sometimes a complete 180, or even just end up in a different universe doing something completely different. Um, is that something that you're experiencing, or are you happy in that particular zone right now?
Um, s- right now, I'm quite happy where I'm at. I do get the 180 thing because you do the same thing over years, you're bored, and you want to do something that kind of sparks your creative
Hmm.
feeling again. But right now, I think generally is I know what I like, I know what I enjoy doing. Now the question, the endless challenge and question for myself is like, how do I get better and more efficient within that
Hmm.
spectrum and improve my work even more, or make it more efficient, or how do I communicate the forms that I have in my head better without putting as much effort or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's always something that you can, like, very specific niche things that you can tackle. But right now, yeah, it's yeah, I'm just staying where I am and trying
Mm.
to improve even further.
And just like touch up on your work in general. Just got it on my screen over here now. And just like for me, I enjoy looking at your work. Obviously, a because it's just cool. Like I guess that's what everyone's always says when they see stuff. The first reaction is, "Hey, that's cool." But because, like, and I mentioned before about you that you can see the artist's voice. That you can see with different artists, you can always see whether it's recognizable in terms of the forms they use, or maybe it's not. But you can just kind of see with the style, or just that like I mentioned, gray areas. Like it's not specifically you can like you hold what it is, but you can just tell that person created that for whatever reason. Um, like and another thing as well is like you can see that you have fun with your subject matter. Like you could say it's there's like element of fun. There's obviously comedy. Like you could even say very very beautiful memes in some of the stuff you've done. Like taking look in the example like when you did all the social networks and you just turned them into props. Like that's like you
Yeah.
could say gourmet memes or something. Not to discredit anything in any particular way that you've done. Obviously, they're way much more than that in my opinion. But like, I guess why do you create like that? Is it just style, or is it again a conscious choice? And is that just simply the way you have fun?
So do you mean in terms of why do I create those certain subject matters, or why does it look like that?
Um, let's go with that type of subject matter.
Uh, okay. Well, that falls into different aspects, categories. I think one thing that I'm always trying to do is to be very aware of what has been done before and
Mm,
what hasn't, and trying to find subject matters that are overlooked. For example, the trash bin props or
mm,
the other things. It's just like stuff that never really anyone tackled. It's very like, if you want to put it on the terms, it's generic or casual stuff.
yeah, yeah.
So, for example, nobody designed like the sickest sci-fi toothbrush, but we use a toothbrush every day. But
Sick.
like nobody does that because everyone wants to do cool characters with like nice proportions and
Yeah, yeah,
put it on our station. But yeah, we can talk about that another time.
yeah.
Um, yeah, or like just very very casual stuff that you just don't really think about.
Mhm.
And then I think if you do it really well, it stands out as well
Mm.
because people are like, wait a minute, this is like, when was the last time you seen like the sickest, I don't know, toilet paper dispenser? No, no one
I'm
does
sure
that.
we're gonna see that on your next project, I guess.
Well, I mean, maybe I don't know. I'm already, yeah, but you get the
No,
point.
I
So that's
100% get your point. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So that's one point. The other thing is like, again, stuff that has been done before. Obviously, I have my own inspirations and artists that I really look up to, and every time they post, I'm like, wow, this is depressing, like that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it's like certain influences that I don't like personally. I try to stay away from them.
Mm,
Uh, a very good example is, maybe I get too much hate of it, but I don't like Star Wars as much as other
mhm,
people do, and I try to stay away from it.
mhm,
And because I know I don't like it, and I know what I don't like about it, which is specifically like all the random greeble on the
mm.
surfaces,
Yep,
which is
yep,
very different to like the work that I do. If you think about it,
yep.
I try to stay away from it. I don't like it personally, and because I know of that and I'm very aware of it, then I don't do it. So that's one way to approach it. The other thing is, I always, well, I wouldn't call myself lazy, but I don't like to work. So I'm always trying to find like what's the most efficient way that I can communicate something with the
Mm,
fewest lines possible and the fewest amount of work. And I think that kind of philosophy did lead to a lot of like always trying to be very simplistic about the stuff I draw to a certain degree and not overpopulated with certain things, and just try to cut corners as much as I can while still trying to make it look cool, which is very challenging
Mm.
sometimes. So yeah.
Um, that's great to hear that insight. And like say for example, myself, I do like Star Wars, and
Yeah.
I've like seen that influence, but also I can 100% relate to what you're saying because lately I've been trying to move away from that type of influence because exactly what you just said, like I can see how some of the stuff that I'm making, that influence being on there, and using the Greebles example, like be more conscious about the decision making in the forms as opposed to just slapping stuff on there just to get to the finish line and then moving on.
Yeah.
Like taking that next level. But I also commend you because being fully aware of that, like knowing that, okay, this is that particular space, I'm gonna go in this lane and I'm gonna stay true to it, and not waver from there because I think um like it's quite easy. Maybe it's for whatever reason, maybe it's people who are just up and coming, it happens to people who are established, but you can easily get drawn into trends or assume, and maybe this is a social media thing, like why, like certain things are popping and that makes you think that that's what you need to do to also hit the heights as well.
Yeah.
But like it's great to hear and it's inspiring to hear, and it's also encouraging to see as well that by resisting that, almost so to speak, not to put words in your mouth, that it can lead to equally successful and a unique voice. And especially in this current space of social media where there's always new droves of artists coming in, which I personally think is good to see, but it also makes it more difficult to kind of get your voice heard through all of that noise.
Yeah.
And
It,
your approach just shows that that's a perfect way to make sure your voice is heard.
yeah, it's like you said, like, it's very great because on one side it's good, right? Like it's unavoidable to get not inspired by stuff and then
Mm,
copy it subconsciously because you like it so much. Like that's, you can't really avoid that.
yeah.
But then at the same time, it's also incredibly hard to stay away from that and then try to come up with something on your own,
Mm,
because no matter what you do, you're always going to have influences from something that has been done before. And that's something I always struggle as well, is I recognize in my own work stuff, I know what I've been influenced from.
mhm,
Sometimes it looks too close for my personal taste to something that I like, but I guess there's just no other way other than like keep drawing,
yeah.
keep designing, and then eventually it will evolve to something that you can call hopefully your own or very distinctive. Um, but then again, there's nothing wrong with copying as well
Mm,
because you get so inspired. Again, sorry, I know I repeat myself like all the time, but there's no right and wrong in
mm,
this subject matter.
yes.
I do think though that in the long term, it might not be easy in the beginning of being stubborn and doing your own thing, because sometimes that's something that, I don't know, the market is not looking for.
Mhm,
If let's say your stuff is ultra weird
mm,
and it's your own true stuff, and I'm saying you should keep true to yourself, and then you're wondering, oh, I've been true to myself, I don't get any jobs, then it's
mm,
like sometimes the market doesn't want it. That comes down to like your ability to adapt to it as well and what you're looking for.
mm,
Because if you're applying for a certain company with a certain style, then yes, you should cater your own portfolio towards that,
mm.
but still add your own flavor and ingredients to it.
And just touching upon that as well. So obviously you've worked in a studio and you've kind of touched upon like sometimes a certain, not so much culture of that specific studio, but just like working in a studio type vibe where it's a case of like maximize every single minute that's there. But again, like you've also worked freelance as well, like work for some very very cool companies. Um, and again, you mentioned about being a unique voice or being like being stubborn and doing things that is unique to yourself, and obviously that's cool. Have you found with any briefs you're getting or feedback when you obviously hand over work to a client, like have you seen any, maybe resistance is the wrong word, but any like say not fully accepting of the originality putting into the work? Or maybe to simplify the question even more is, when you're working for a client, um, do you approach their briefs the same way as you do your own?
Yes, I would say so. The way I do approach it is, okay, you get a brief, and then it's again, I do a lot of comparisons to cooking, because the brief is the recipe, what they're looking for. So you do know what those ingredients, what they're looking at.
Mhm.
You get reference based on that, and then you do your own thing, which I guess is your cooking style. Whether you want to do braising or I don't know, slow cooking, whatever, that's totally up to you. But essentially, is the process is okay based on what they give me. I do my own thing, like my own ideas, and then after the feedback round, then it's like okay, they like this or they don't like this, and then I do listen to like what they want to do because at the
Mm.
end of the day, it's their project. I'm
Mhm.
just there to help,
Mhm.
even though that's also another interesting discussion because companies want to hire you for your own voice or for your own ideas, and then a lot of times happens is like you propose something that you think is your own, but then they don't like it. So it's like that fine balance of listening to feedback while staying true to yourself. Like it's very gray again. Um, but yeah, generally with freelance and in house is yeah, I get the brief. I do whatever ideas come to me, and then we work together from there on.
Mm.
It's like, oh, I don't like this, remove this, and it's like, okay, I get it, you don't like it, but there's still ways that I can find to incorporate my own
Mm.
ideas to it, and that's kind of the challenge as well.
Sick.
Yeah.
So again, like just to summarize on that, it's a case of with your mindset when it comes to clients, it's more so what's the forefront of your mind is okay, I need to do what's best for them and their project, right? Like that's the primary directive.
Well, yeah, I mean, they hired me because they want help for the
Yeah.
project, and
Yeah. Yeah.
they generally know what they're looking for, but they give me the briefs and I follow
Mm.
the briefs, but I still try to be creative within my own voice and try to submit it. And then it's all about just communicating and working together.
Hmm.
And then, yeah.
And because I've had like conversations with some artists, and not just even in the creative space, and just different realms altogether, and like how they deal with like the equivalent of a client. Like it could be a manager, it could be like anything else, right? And I have found out there's a mixture of opinions. Obviously, very great, like you said. There's everyone's got a different way of doing things. But like, have you got it where um like maybe um let me figure out a good way to say this. It's like so let's say obviously you mentioned that you get feedback and it's not so well, it's not gone so well, or maybe it's just not clicking. So you just find a way to deliver that. Do you ever get into a situation where it can get frustrating and it almost kind of like you tend to not so much fight back, but kind of challenge that and just trying to like force your point of view or your style, if that makes
Uh,
sense?
well, sometimes I would say not so much in freelance, but within the studio, it was sometimes a bit frustrating because the art director had like a really strong vision of what they wanted,
Mhm.
which coincidentally didn't wasn't was I was it wasn't what I was looking for or what I liked, like that certain visual style. But I think that's where the separation comes from. Okay, this is not your personal work. They hired you for your skills, so whatever they want to have and do, I'm just gonna do it. I don't attach myself to any of the
Mm.
work that I do for them. And then it's like it becomes just a job if you want to put it that
Mhm.
way. And then usually after having that separation, mental separation, I'm fine. It's like if they want to change something that I don't agree with, it's like I don't care.
Mm.
I'll just do it because that's work and that's it. Rather than I don't think it's like if you fight against it, then I don't think that's gonna turn out good.
Mm.
You can make so what you can do is if they want a specific change, it's like you do that change, but then if you have the time and energy, you can make your own version next to it and submit two versions, and then be like, hey, maybe you guys are looking for this change that I think
Mm.
looks better, and then our discussion starts from there. So a lot of it is just communication and how
Mm.
you present yourself.
And yeah, communication, like you said, that's a big thing, and especially I guess in freelance when like in a studio, there's this face-to-face meetings. You have that nuance where body language does play a part into how you communicate an idea, even.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe freelance, I'm assuming that your freelance has mainly been remote, or do you often work in studio with freelance? I guess pre-pandemic possibly as well. That was maybe more a case of in studio.
You mean like if the studios I've worked with, if it was remote or
Yes,
oh
yes,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
everything was from home. So yeah, it's
So,
just different type of communication.
hmm.
It was mostly emails. Uh,
So like, how do you like? Do you have a formula with communication as well, or is it something that it's just the way you, I guess, just like your natural style of communicating, or like, I guess rather what I'm asking is, how much thought do you put into? how you correspond and deal with correspondence with you and your clients. And for all our listeners, like, what key tips and advice would you offer to anybody who's looking for that, to say like, hey, for communication, like, these are the key things to either avoid or look out for or definitely do?
So sometimes a lot of it also depends on the client itself, how they brief you, because different clients are gonna have different preferences. And then I do let them know that anything, either they have like notes of specific things that they have that they like. If they want me to incorporate that, then they should let me know. If they have reference of that, even better. And then it's just basically, as dumb as the question sounds to you, as soon as you're confused about something, just ask it.
Mm,
It does, like, it never hurts to just double ask, regardless of like how stupid it might seem in your
mm,
head, and just to make sure. And then the other thing that comes then is, okay, making sure that you guys both understand each other before you start working. Usually that happens whether with a meeting, you can ask like all the questions, or you just write with email, and just preparing yourself as much as possible to avoid any confusion.
mm. And just more so much on the freelance space, and this is definitely a question from myself, for me, as much as it is for, obviously, for the listeners as well. Like, I've just entered, I think, my similar time of just like, probably just my entered my nearly my second year of full-time freelancing. Maybe a bit less, actually, I don't even know, but it's around that kind of time. And like, I'm trying to figure out how to just navigate that space and just recalibrate everything to kind of handle, like, the different requirements that it offers, because it is different to like working in a studio, or like maybe a rigid structure where there's like, you're in a physical building and there's a time of work and all that kind of stuff. But like, for yourself, do you have certain do's and don'ts? And what by that I mean, like, say you won't take on X amount of projects. This is a limitation that you will never exceed. Obviously, like, you kind of mentioned it before about how you work in terms of time and sleep and make sure you
Yeah.
get that and stuff. But like, are there any other things that jump out to you that um that you ensure that you kind of like, it's part of your, I guess, your code of conduct for yourself?
I think I'm a bit different, because online you always hear about how freelancers, they're just perma tired because they take on all the projects at once. They can't get any sleep, and I do get that aspect. Like, I'm not saying I don't anything, because sometimes, with freelance it's very unstable.
Mm-hmm.
So if something comes your way, and usually there's like, it's almost like a meme where you hear nothing for months, and then all at once everything drops, and then
Yes.
you're like, fuck, I need to take this because like I need to make money and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it really depends on each situation. The way I've been doing it was, I've been very fortunate to have this current lifestyle, is that um I only work 4 days a week, and then I give myself three days, like a 3 day weekend. That is to ensure that, well, pretty much I can enjoy myself during the weekends and not worry too much about work. It
Mm-hmm.
is way riskier, of course, but for now the benefits do outweigh like the possibility of like not finding any work for a long period of time. And then yeah, right now the current schedule that I have is 2 days from one company and then 2 days for another company, so I do get the variation between the projects. And then that's kind of it. And it did happen, like, I was just being very honest. Okay, I can only do 2 days a week. This is the amount of work that I can do for you guys
Mm-hmm.
within those 2 days. This is what you guys can expect. Are you guys fine with it? And sometimes some companies, like, they're not fine with it because they're looking for full-time freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
And then if that happens, I'm like, okay, I mean, I don't want to sound snobby or pretentious, but then I'm like, okay, um, sorry, I can only do 2 days. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
very strict with that
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to burn out with freelance.
That's no, that I'm glad you've mentioned that, and it doesn't come across as snobby at all. It's actually just showing an awareness of you fully appreciating the time that you have and how you want to use it. Um, and just if I may ask, like, when you mention about how much you can do in a certain amount of day, is that more in reference to like finished work, or like how was that more specific on whatever? Does that vary, obviously, depending on what they're asking you to do? Is this a case of like, hey, this is how much time it takes me to complete, say, a concept, or X amount of concepts? Like, what do you mean by when you say how much you can complete in these this block of time that you mentioned to their clients?
So generally, I think especially in the recent posts or the most recent post that I've posted on our station, that's kind of the type of work I do. So it's just sheets with, to keep it very vague, it's just sheets of props, like
Hmm.
prop viz dev.
Hmm.
That's what I do. And and then within a 2 day time frame, I do submit whatever they have briefed me on,
Right.
and just do like different stuff for them. So that's kind of what I do, because
Cool.
I don't think within a 2 day frame you can do like you can. It's really hard to nail down on one specific design and just like really flesh it out. So I'm more responsible for this dev.
Mm. And that's something that I've started to do more often now with clients is be more specific about a what do you want in terms of deadlines and
Yeah,
versus what I can give you, and then go from there.
yeah,
And be more detailed as opposed to early on is a case of you need work, I'm available, let's do it. When maybe I'm not available, but I still do it, and then
hmm,
the sleep gets a hit and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And it's also encouraging to see, and I've had this conversation with a few people now, and they've mentioned this, and it's something that I'm definitely going to adopt more going forward, and I have done so already. Is like you mentioned, like blocking off time that is completely unavailable for maybe commercial projects. Like never eat into that,
yeah.
because it just seems logical. And with the responsibilities I have outside of work, it just needs to be done because otherwise that's going to get neglected. And even that too, again, this is from being burnt the hard way, is like mainly by accident and things just aligning in the way they did. Because it's, I think it's actually a universal fact that it's, like you said, it's quiet for periods, then it all comes in once, then it's quiet for
Yeah.
periods again. Obviously it still can vary, but that's quite, I think, a common thing. Um, and like having to tackle many things at once, still getting it done, but realizing how much it takes out of you, it is best to put a cap on things. Obviously, unless you do get maybe a project that you cannot refuse, that's something that you have to have a conversation with yourself and decide if it's worth it or not. But
Yes.
it is important to be strict with yourself. Not so much like, I don't think it's arrogance at all. If people see it that way, then obviously that's maybe how it comes across. But I just think it's like you mentioned before. It's a strategic thing. It's a an element of efficiency as well. Because like you said, if you're burnt out doing work, your decision making in a million years is never going to be as good as if you're rested or just in control of things, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's also the conception, the misconception that freelance, you just perma burned out because you said yes to like every project that came in, and as a result of that, it's like you get very little sleep and you're just grinding away. And then yes, it might be a bit irresponsible, or it might come off as irresponsible to saying no to a lot of clients. But I found that, at least like for myself, I do know my limits and I don't want to burn out ever again
Mm.
as bad as I did before. So like you said, I'm generally more strict with knowing what I can do and what I can't do. And if I know, okay, right now I have these clients, if I take on one more, it's just gonna be a lot of stress. Yes, I get more money, but I don't think that's worth the stress,
Mm.
and I'd rather keep it like earn less, but keep my mental health and my well being still very nice.
And regarding when it comes to talking with clients about this specific thing, have you had any, like, say, overly negative experiences, or has it always been very understandable? And in fact, they appreciate the fact that you've been quite upfront about it.
I've never had any negative experiences. I just told them like, because there's no point in like hiding what you
Mm.
can't do or you can do and all that. If you're just very direct and very honest, and you'd be like, hey, I can only do 2 days for this project. Is that okay with you? And then if they say no, totally understandable.
Hmm.
And then it's like, okay, you move on. That's okay. Maybe another time. But then also, if they say yes, or like generally the first video call, I do make sure it's like, hey, what exactly in my portfolio attracted you
Mm.
guys?
Yes.
What do you guys want from me? What are you guys expecting? And then from then I get a better idea, because most of the time it is true what they were attracted to, like what the prop vista that I've done for my own personal work. And it's like, yes, that's exactly what I do. I can give you this service 2 days a week. Is that okay for you guys? Yes, let's go from there. And then usually what happens is I do try to make sure, like, make their life as easy as possible. So with freelance, communication is so important. It is very hard to nail, let's say, the first draft to make it what exactly what they were thinking. Like that's very hard. And then in a studio environment is way easier to get feedback because you can just go to the art director or message him. It's like, hey, is this like, what you were thinking of?
Mm.
Give you quick feedback. Fine, you're on the right track. With freelance, it's very different. With freelance, you're kind of on your own, so you have to rely on yourself to make the decisions. So the way you avoid that is again by asking a lot of questions, what exactly they're looking for, and then the other thing is like being really aware or try to really understand what they want from you, what they want from this brief, and then submitting it and just do it really well.
Mm.
And then what that has led to is that I'm very lucky that I have been having the same clients for a long period of time because freelance sometimes again it's very unstable nature. You can have a client for 1 month and never hear back, or it can be longer term. And
Mm.
so far, I've been very lucky with that. I do try my best to make them happy so that they can keep hiring me so that I can maintain this lifestyle. So
That's a
yeah,
perfect formula as well, and that's well
yeah,
put. So yeah, thank you for like mentioning it in that particular way. Because I think it does help in demystifying, like, sometimes we just all, and this is the human brain, that we want to get answers in the most simplest way, in the quickest way, and we just assume, like, the difference with freelance and studio life is the obvious common things that we just mentioned. But it's also looking at the gray areas where you can really get a better understanding and see if it is right for you or not, or even if it's not a case of it's right for me or not. This
yeah.
is like, circumstances mean you have to do things in a certain way. Then you prepares yourself to just figure things out, and obviously just work your way towards that.
That yeah. I mean, I know we're getting near the time, but basically that pretty much falls exactly what you said. It's again, everyone is very different. Um, there's people who they're just complete studio people. They love it there. They're thriving there with like the social interaction, being on site, and then switching off as soon as you come home. And then there's people where they prefer the freelance lifestyle
Mhm.
of just being at home. You have your comfort, and then you just do it from there. You have not many meetings, that kind of stuff. So everyone is just very different and depends on what you want to do.
Before we wrap up, I have, let's say, I got a million questions, but let's say we keep it to three. Just want to ask you before we do end.
Yeah.
The first one is, again, keeping it on tune with just the freelance side of things, and even just like as an art professional. So I just wanted to pick your brain on behaviors you have towards, I guess, like the finances side of things. So not so much like money, because this is another thing that I've realized about over time, is a case of initially you just think rate how much it should be, and then you calculate your life based on a specific arbitrary number, which can vary from person to person, region to region. More so, what I want to get at is your behavior with money, especially as a freelancer, because it is different versus, let's say, a salary where you get a guaranteed amount of money per month
Yeah.
versus something where it can vary. So, like, again, someone who is clearly quite efficient with just how they operate, does that also work with how you handle finances? And if so, like, what is your relationship with money in terms of how you use it as an artist, maybe, or just in terms of like do you put a percentage away? Do you think long term, or is it something that you just maybe not even put too much thought into, and you just make sure you take care of the basics? But I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah, I mean, generally, like, I don't. There was a very big jump between going from studio to freelance in terms of like the money that came in because you have to charge more. So there was a big jump, and because more money comes in, you're very tempted to like, oh shit, I have all this money. Like, there's so many things. Like, it does open possibilities that
Mm.
you didn't have before. But at the same time, is I I have pretty much everything that I have that I want. Like, I don't need very many things. So most of the money that comes in, I do save it, whether that's an ISA, investing it, or whatever, or in a savings account. I do try to give like a certain percentage of the income that comes in. And then in terms of spending, well, I do spend it on things that I care about, which is books. I think there's nothing wrong. Like, it always pays off to buy books with money that you earn. And then the second one is like food. Like, I do enjoy going out and eating nice food or being able. It doesn't necessarily have to be expensive food, but just like the fact that I can go out that and eat something nice for myself. That falls again into the, how to say, taking care of myself.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, and then it's not really upgrading your lifestyle massively. I still
Mm,
live the same way. I still cook a lot by myself,
sick.
and it's just keeping the same lifestyle and not really upgrading it.
Nice. And I guess like not like you mentioned, not being influenced by the possibilities that money can bring. It's just a case of enhancing what you already do, right? And making things more better and efficient and just,
Yeah,
like ensure it doesn't distract you from what the main interest that you have.
yeah, no, because like literally, I have everything I want and I need. Like all I need is a PC and internet
Yeah.
connection, and that's really all I need. And then I'm happy with that. So I don't really need much per se. So a lot of the money goes to the savings or to the ISA or something.
And for the final, I guess two questions, I'll confuse them into one. Back to again your work. Let's take a look at like say, I think it's your latest piece. I guess the ceramic series or ceramic two, which is
Yeah.
just a bunch of sick. I'm gonna simplify it in a dumb way, like sick imagery. But as a designer myself, like looking at it, it's just a great example of what design should be, in my opinion, and how to present it. And just taken away from being an artist, just as a consumer of cool things, like this is just super, super cool to me. And based on obviously what you're talking about today, I can see the influences and how you've fused that into design. And again, like you said, look at a space where no one even is living in and use it to make badass stuff. So I'd love to hear more about that particular project, what it means to you while you're doing it, and then also, just to cap everything off, what else is exciting you in the creative space? Like, is it new technologies? Is it new avenues, like, say, the NFT spaces, or maybe something else on the horizon that is really exciting you? Or maybe something not art related at all. But yeah, over to yourself.
Um. Okay. So ceramic too. That was the first question.
Yeah, yeah.
So generally, the whole layout in terms like simplicity, the style of ceramics, being very simple and white and being very efficient with like lines and economy, that applies to the way I presented stuff as well because all of the backgrounds are white. All of the images they have maximum width. So like when you scroll down, it's like the same consistent
Mhm.
width, whatever. So it's like well, I try to see it from like a consumer standpoint of view. Is like when you're scrolling, you want to have a nice scrolling experience. And then if it's cool stuff, which I hope is cool, then it's even better and more memorable. But then because it's my own project, like I just do whatever I want. So you see a little bit of like graphic designs, a little bit of like weird stuff, and then just complete random stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, I try to make it as easy as possible to like digest for the viewer and very upfront. So there's I don't think there's any need for like fancy backgrounds or anything. It's
Mhm.
just there in your face, and then you like it or you don't. That's kind of it.
And I think that's a great way to explain it. And like you just mentioned about fancy backgrounds, like apply that to other areas, like say music, food, even. Sometimes you just need the basics of the basics, and you got something perfect.
Yeah,
Like you don't
I mean,
need the extra garnishes and sauces and whatever else and what have you. Just knowing how to use ingredients is all you need.
yeah, and yeah, again, a lot of the focus is just simplicity, and not cluttering too much of things, and then
Mhm.
yeah, make it memorable.
And
Hopefully.
how long did this take you? Like, is this something that you just chipped away at over time when you've had time, or is this something that you focus on and do a huge blast and then just have a break?
No, it's just very so before it was always like I had I think a lot of people do that as well. It's like when you start a new project, in your head you're like planning, I need exact this many amount of pieces, I need to do this and that, all of that, and it never went well because like I would do one piece and then it just goes off the rails or I never achieve it or whatever. So I found it a lot more approachable is if you just do one piece first, just do it,
Hmm.
doesn't matter. And then from there, you like do a second piece. Whether that's related to the first piece or not, in a way, it has to be, but doesn't have to be that strict. Or you come to something, to a theme that you're like, oh, this is interesting. I could expand on it. So it's more like an organic approach.
Hmm.
That's kind of what happened with the social media stuff. I had this really dumb idea of, okay, the Facebook one, the hard disk was the first idea. And I didn't even think about the other ones. So it was,
Right, right,
okay,
right.
I have this really dumb idea. Let's just try it out, see what happens. Do I like it? Do I don't like it? I don't care. I'm just gonna do it and evaluate later. Then I thought, hey, okay, this could be interesting. There's different types of social media and different types of like these gadgets that you can combine. And then you do the second one. It's like, okay, this is not bad. And then you do the third one and all that. And then at some point you have something going on.
Mm.
And from there you expand. So it's the same with ceramics. The ceramic stuff that I do. I don't allocate a certain amount of chunks or deadlines or time or anything. It's just I just post it when I feel like I have enough to show where I'm happy at. I think it's very easy. Like let's say you create something, and then it's very easy to get excited and wanting to post it
Mhm.
immediately. You're like, oh, I'm so excited because you want to share it around after you
Yes.
post, like create it, and you're excited about it. But generally, what I found better to like what works better for me, and I'm not saying this is specifically towards our station and not social media. It's that you just keep it. Don't show it to anyone. Don't say anything. Just keep working on it at your own time. And then at some point you have like a big body of work that you can just drop. Because I think if you do something really cool and it's a lot of it or really good quality, and you just like nuclear blast it on our station or something all at once, it has a bigger impact than, for example, if I finish one piece, I instantly upload it to our station and then just clutter my portfolio with that. So yeah, I hope that makes sense.
No, 100%. And yeah, just one final thing before we wrap up is what is exciting you in the art space? And is there anything that's really like making you want to dive into like either new spaces or even new workflows?
In art per se, I don't think there's much because I pretty much just draw. I don't do many like fancy software experimentation
Mm.
like other people do, which is fine. You know, people get excited by softwares, and technology does open up a lot of different
Yeah.
avenues and things that you couldn't do before. But I went, or I'm going the different route where I'm gonna stay with like lines and try to be even better and more efficient, more, yeah, that type
Sick.
of thing, and really refine it. And I guess that's, yeah, part of it is also I'm just really bad at learning new software. Like I just get so discouraged, and then it's like, oh, you see someone making amazing stuff on 3D code, you want to try it, and then I'm like, oh, I need to learn all of this again. i could
Mm.
do
Mhm.
i could do the same thing but in lines and way faster,
Mm.
even though it's not as efficient maybe. So line work does have like the stuff that I do does also have its own drawbacks
Mhm.
compared to like other people that learn proper 3D software. But yeah, in terms of art, I think it's just technology. I'm excited. Maybe at some point there's gonna be the point where you can just attach patches to your forehead and then you can draw with your mind. Who knows? Stuff
Probably.
like that. But non-art related, I would say it's just, so if you take a look, it is mind blowing that we went from not flying at the beginning of the 20th century.
Mm.
Within 60 years, you went from no flying to the moon landing. I don't know what else to say to that. It's like it's so crazy to me, like how much technology has expanded, and that same to like Wi-Fi. You remember like when iPhones wasn't even a thing. You all had like the blocky Nokia, the Motorola V3, like the flip screen. That was like amazing, and then even web design didn't evolve very much. I think
Mm.
there was like a clear point back then. It was like very cluttered web design with a lot of add-ons and flash web stuff, and now it's like very nicely structured. So there's like a certain design philosophy behind it. So I'm just really excited to see what happens because
Mm.
so much stuff can change. Like same with like Tesla and self-driving cars. Like who would have thought within 10 years, 20 years that could happen? So it's very exciting to see like 10 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, just what would happen
Mm. And
technologically.
is it things like those kind of advancements and when you look into that kind of stuff because some people are almost in fear of that. Maybe it's just a fear of change or just fear of something that's like potentially going to completely change the way people live. Or is someone who's just, or like, not always, but like, it's more of an excitement thing. Like these new advancements are just exciting to see how that's going to affect your life and even maybe most, in theory, should improve it, right?
Well, of course, there's always, no matter what era we live in, there's always gonna be like fear of the unknown, what's gonna happen. And then on the other side, there's always gonna be excitement. Like it's just the same thing every single time. When something new comes out, there's always people against it, and then there's always people who embrace it.
Mm.
That's unavoidable. But I do think that progress is unavoidable. like innovation and progress. Like no matter what you do, how much you resist it, you can't escape it, because it's the same as, okay, I do remember that when I was still a kid, I went to China to visit, and then everything was still like cash based and all that. You pay for the supermarkets, and then I think like 15 years later, oh, you pay everything through your like messenger app, like
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
WeChat. And like, okay, you go to like a traditional market, with farmers market, and they have their own like QR code and it's a stand, and just how you pay, and it's like whether you like it or not, that's like
Yeah.
it becomes part of your life.
Mm.
So yeah, so there's gonna be good things and bad things. Um,
And just one final thing, just before we wrap up. Any final words from yourself to listeners, fans of your work, and new fans of your work?
any words?
Yeah, yeah,
Well, eat good food. Good food, no, don't like good food is magical. It No matter how much of a shit day you had, it's gonna brighten your day. Take care of yourself, sleep. I sound like an old man or like a grandma, I know, but it's very important, I think. The other thing is like don't stress. Like if things are not going your way, don't stress too much about it. Just keep slowly at your own pace. That's the important part. Just do something one thing at a time. You don't have to grind 24/7 all the time. As long as you do something, as small as it is, it's gonna stack up.
well put, well put. Sheng, thank you so much for your time. This is amazing chatting with you, and thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to Sheng for joining me for this episode, and I'm sure you'll agree this was a great way to kickstart the year. Hit the links to follow Sheng and see what he's up to, and then head on over to learnsquared.com and get your year off to a creative start thanks to all our first lessons, which are completely free. Please like and subscribe. I've been your host, Aaron Danda. Till next time.